Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It is time for a view from the opposition ahead of Wednesday night's Carabao Cup tie against Tottenham Hotspur. Big occasion under the lights at St James's Park in a competition Newcastle know only too well. A lot of similarities between the two clubs in terms of going into this season on the back of historic trophy wins last time out. So to join me to give everything all things Spurs, it is the Mirror's Ryan Taylor, someone who knows everything about Tottenham Hotspur and what to expect from them at St James's Park on Wednesday. Ryan, welcome along.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
First of all, I might as well get straight into Spurs. Obviously, as I say, on the back of that historic Europa League final win last year, what were the expectations going into this season, albeit under a new manager?
I think once Spurs made the decision to part company with Ange Postecoglou, I think it was clear that maybe the club was moving into a new dawn, really. Obviously, Postecoglou did pull off the historic Europa League triumph, but I think it's fair to say everyone was pretty much in agreement that domestically the form was nowhere near good enough. An incredible amount of losses, really. And I think Frank is a manager that ticks a number of boxes, really, that Tottenham are looking for. Sorry, I think Spurs are a club with huge global potential. We've seen their incredible new stadium. They're now back in the Champions League. They've got world class players in the form of Christian Romero and arguably Mickey van der Ven as well. Sorry. So I think it's just about trying to tap into that potential. I think with Spurs over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of fluctuating, a lot of inconsistency. Whereas Spurs under Mauricio Pochettino were very much a side that were finishing in the top four every season. So I think Frank ticked a number of boxes. He's a progressive manager, a great communicator. He improves players. He's got a track record for promoting players from the academy as well. So I can see very much so why he was effectively the number one choice to replace. And once they decided to part company. So heading into this season, I think the expectations were fairly high because they're back in the Champions League. And although there's no real sort of mention of title contention, despite Spurs' strong start to the season, I think top five would definitely represent clear progress domestically.
There wasn't really any surprise, was there, despite that Europa League final win, that they did decide to make a change. I mean, you mentioned the league campaign last time out. What were the sort of key factors behind that? I want to call it underwhelming, but it wasn't. It was just disappointing, wasn't it, really?
It was. Well, I would say Jekyll and Hyde, but at the same time, it was actually consistent in a way because there was a real sort of a period of time where Spurs couldn't seem to buy a win in the Premier League. So I think ultimately injuries did play a huge factor, and I think that's something that it was used as a stick to beat Ange with because he did continually reference those. But we did see towards the end of the season when Spurs got a number of key players back, actually the improvement in Europe. Obviously, Ange's style of play, I mean, he's just been fired by Forest after 8 matches, but it was a style that became easy to play against for the opposition. We did see in the Europa League that he did kind of change it stylistically. Spurs actually became more solid. They went to Frankfurt and Bodo, which were two difficult away matches in Europe, and actually showcased their defensive solidity. So the big question was, why is this not being replicated in the Premier League? And I don't think we really ever truly got an answer to that. I think obviously there became a point later in the season where Ange told his players that they would now be prioritising Europe, even if that meant taking a hit and losing more matches in the Premier League. But once Spurs sort of began to fall away so far away from the European spots in the Premier League, it was clear that he could actually do that. Obviously, it was a boom or bust strategy, and effectively it did pay dividends in the end. But I think ultimately Spurs became too easy to play against with that high line. They would try and attack throughout the course of the game, and ultimately it proved to be their Achilles heels because they became, once they went the first goal down, they were never really coming back.
I say this with all due respect to Brentford, but this feels like a massive opportunity for Thomas Frank now. I mean, it is a step up in expectation at the club. It is, again, with due respect to Brentford, a step up in the size of the club as well. As I say, a massive chance for him to really prove himself as an elite manager.
Absolutely. I think, Spurs are now sitting pretty in the table, third in the league after the 3-0 win at Everton on Sunday. But it was interesting that a few of the Spurs reporters, I was speaking to them in Monaco after we watched the goalless draw, and Spurs actually surrendered 23 shots on their goal. Um, and I just left the stadium with the feeling that maybe it was too soon to judge Frank. I did kind of have some concerns about some of the comments that he made in some of the post-match press conferences after Monaco and Aston Villa last Sunday. That basically he wasn't overly surprised by the way in which the game panned out, or both games, so to speak. I think Spurs' home form has been really questionable this season, but no Premier League team has taken more points on the road than them. But the key factor, really, which really sort of typifies the difference between the size of the jobs he had at Brentford and Spurs, was the fact that he's now juggling 3 games a week. At Brentford, of course, there's a full week of training, usually only playing once a week outside of the maybe the cup fixtures, but of course no Europe. Whereas this season, Vicario actually openly admitted to us that Spurs were struggling to combat the fixture congestion because Frank needs results really to continue this sort of momentum. But at the same time, he's got a big squad, and it's just about finding that right balance and the partnerships that work. We've seen Rodrigo Bentancur and João Palhinha have become staples, and I'm sure we'll come onto it. But I think to come to a ground like Newcastle tomorrow night, you need those kind of players to sort of show the steel and keep the team sort of solid. But they've played too much football recently, so I do expect them to be rested. But that's the challenge for Frank, to get the best from all of his squad, much like Eddie Howe's done on Tyneside.
In terms of the summer transfer business, there were some, as you mentioned, more than Palhinha, some eye-catching signings. Obviously, Mohamed Kudus coming over from West Ham as well. What did you make of the summer transfer window?
I think Spurs will probably be largely happy with the business that they've done. They did actually want to bring in another forward, but it wasn't possible in the final days of the window. Someone to play on that left side, effectively a Son replacement, although he is a irreplaceable figure in North London. I think stylistically they did need maybe another left winger. They've had a few teething problems in that position throughout the season so far. Wilson Odobert has played there. Matthias Tell has played there as well, Xavi Simons and Brennan Johnson. But it's clear that Brennan Johnson's favoured position is probably on the right flank, where Mohamed Kudus has made the role his own. He did play centrally against Everton on Sunday, but Kudus and Palhinha have been real instant hits. And I'd be astounded if Spurs didn't make Palhinha's loan permanent. Xavi Simons has actually been largely disappointing. I'd probably compare his sort of start to life in the Premier League to Florian Wirtz.
Yes.
Shows glimpses of promise, but ultimately struggling to get up to speed. And when you pay a big fee, such as around 52 million for a player that's played at the European Championships with Holland and scored in the semi-final against England, you expect a little bit more. Outside of that, they did make loans for Kevin Danso and Matthias Tell permanent. Danso has been really impressive in recent weeks, filling in for Romero, but Tell hasn't quite hit the heights that were expected of him. In January, obviously, he was such a big story. We didn't know whether he was going to go to Spurs, Manchester United, or Arsenal once he decided to leave Bayern. But actually, he's been rather underwhelming, and he was actually left out of Frank's Champions League squad, which was a big blow.
In terms of tomorrow night's game, when you look at team selection, you've sort of hinted that there would be changes. Fully expect Newcastle to do the same, given the sort of congestion they've got with fixtures. What sort of side do you think we can expect? Will there be some surprises from Thomas Frank?
I think the big kind of talking point and what everyone's waiting in anticipation for is whether Mickey van der Ven plays. Spurs are a different side without him, unfortunately. He's been absolutely instrumental in recent weeks. Romero picked up an adductor issue. He's training back on the grass with the fitness coaches, but he's not going to be available tomorrow night. And that's put a little bit of extra strain on Van der Ven. You might recall that he's had a series of hamstring issues since he signed from Wolfsburg in the summer of 2023. And there is a little bit of concern about how much football he's playing, because he's only been rested against Doncaster in the previous round. And outside of coming off in the 80th minute in the 3-0 win over West Ham, he's actually played every minute this season. I asked Thomas Frank about this last Friday, and he said that he was confident that the Spurs physio team and medical staff had got Van de Ven into a position where effectively he was much stronger fitness-wise in terms of his muscles and his recovery. But that is the one that everyone's looking at. Outside of that, I do expect Frank to make changes because, as you said, much like Eddie Howe, Spurs have had Champions League matches and they've wanted to get off to a strong start. They're still unbeaten in the Champions League. They've gone fairly strong in each of the 3 matches they've played so far. But this will be a chance for some of the younger players, the likes of Archie Gray, Matthias Tell probably, to come in. The problem is with Romero being out, it's put a little bit of... it's a big change not having Romero in the back line. I think Danso and Van de Ven have been really good back-to-back clean sheets against Monaco and Everton. So it's a balancing act. So I saw Eddie Howe's press conference this morning that he basically said similar, that it was a balancing act of not making too many changes, but also keeping a strong side. So I think Frank finds himself in a very similar boat, but Spurs have got a good squad now, so I think the side they put out will still be capable of maybe getting the club through to the next round, although it won't be easy whatsoever.
I'm pleased you brought up Van de Ven because, he's been outstanding this season so far. He feels like such a key player within that side.
Yeah, he's been instrumental, really. I think everyone knows what a great player he is, but of course he's had these issues with his hamstrings, and it's not helped by the fact he's actually plays at left back now for Holland, which of course involves more sprinting against wingers. But he's really stepped up. I think he's still relatively young at 24. A new contract is in the offing for him, but it's also about the leadership because Spurs have, of course, got a number of key players out with long-term injuries. James Maddison, Dejan Kulusevski as well, Dominic Solanke, who's a big member of the squad as well. So with Romero out, it's really down to Vicario and Van de Ven to sort of be the key leading figures and voices in the dressing room. So I expect him to at least be in the squad tomorrow, Van de Ven. But, when he's not on the pitch, you do fear that Spurs are not the same side, particularly given that Romero is also out at this moment in time.
So if you were doing a scout report for Newcastle, I appreciate they'll be doing it themselves, but who do you say the key player to stop on Wednesday night would be?
It's a good question. I think ultimately it will hinge on how strong Frank goes or how weak he goes, you might say. On the flip side, I think Richarlison is someone that's likely to lead the line. Obviously, Newcastle have a few Brazilian players of their own, but they'll be well aware of his quality. I think he's actually scored, you might be able to point me in the right direction, a few goals against Newcastle at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So he's also got a point to prove at the moment because Randall Kolo Muani came in on Sunday, his first start, done pretty well actually. He was a little bit frustrated to go off. But Spurs are actually getting a lot of their goals from set pieces. So I think maybe not a player, it might actually be a tactic. And we've seen that, their deliveries from both sides. So Kudus usually takes the left footers and Pedro Porro has the in-swinging right-footed corners. Have been a weapon of mass destruction. I think only Arsenal have scored more goals from corners than Spurs, who have 15 since the start of last season in the Premier League. So I think that's what I'd probably say. It's maybe about the collective.
Just looking at, I saw a stat earlier on via another news outlet saying that Eddie Howe's record against Thomas Frank is pretty decent. I think it's 1 defeat in 9. But I guess you can't really read too much into that, given the majority of those, all of those came with Brentford.
Of course, and again, I might be wrong, but I think it was last season. It might have been the season before, but Brentford ran out 4-2 winners over. I think it was 4-2 at the GTEC. Yeah. So
it should have been more.
Yeah, so although it's not the greatest of records, I think ultimately there is a little bit of a recent sample size in that, and obviously it's a different squad now, a different proposition. I think ultimately when the draw came out, I think Tottenham would have been rather disappointed or quietly disappointed because I don't think anyone really wants to go to St James's Park under the lights, and that's a testament to what Eddie Howe's created. But Frank does actually have a record with this season of rectifying bad head-to-head records against opposition managers. He hadn't won against Daniel Farke prior to the recent international break. Spurs, of course, won 2-1 at Ellen Road. Yeah. He has an atrocious record against Unai Emery. I think he's, similarly to Howe and Frank, I think he's only won one of 8 or 9 meetings, and of course Emery got the better of him at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium around 9 days ago now. So it's an interesting stat, and I'm intrigued to see how that plays out as well.
I think we know it really means nothing, does it? Let's be
No,
honest.
of course. Of course.
So, I mean, in terms of that, I'm going to bring up another one anyway. But in terms of Spurs' record at St James's, again, not the greatest in the last sort of 3-4 years. I think had a win during COVID there, didn't they? And then, of course, provided the opposition for Newcastle's first game under the new ownership in 2021. But the last sort of 2-3 years, it hasn't been a happy hunting ground for them.
No, and of course there'll be the memories of, I think it was a 6-1 demolition, which I think spelt the end of Stellini. He was filling in for Antonio Conte following his departure. I think Newcastle ultimately under Eddie Howe are a team that can blow any team away at St James's Park, and as I mentioned 5 minutes ago, that is testament to what he's built and the squad he's built. I think the running power in midfield that Newcastle have, and the forwards at the moment are in brilliant form. I know it was quite a hard-fought win over Fulham, but I think Anthony Gordon has been exceptional in the Champions League. I'm not sure whether he'll play tomorrow, but even if he doesn't, you've got the likes of Harvey Barnes, who on his day is a player that can inflict damage. So it's going to be difficult. I have to be honest, I struggle to see Spurs maybe digging in and maybe coming away with a result, just because I think it's such a tall ask. I know Newcastle do have some injuries at the back, and maybe there's question marks over whether Botman will be fit. But I think given that they're going to rotate, it's going to be difficult. But then I also felt slightly negative ahead of the trip to the Hill Dickinson Stadium, and Spurs blew Everton away. So I think Spurs do have it within them, and also it's clear this season they've actually been better when they've been on their travels. So an interesting matchup, definitely.
I've just done a preview podcast with one of the local writers up here, and sort of mentioned that it feels really unpredictable, this game, because we don't know a lot about the sides that are going to be put out. I think Newcastle will make changes. There's a chance someone like a Will Asula will come in and maybe give Nick Voldemort a rest. As you say, the wing positions, Alanga probably needs game time, so he may start. Harvey Barnes possibly coming in. There's a little bit of debate at the back as well. I'd imagine Aaron Ramsdale will start and goal. So you'd imagine there'd be some extra motivation for him as well, being an ex-Arsenal player. But, if it was sort of full strength, who do you think Spurs would... I hate using the word fear, because I don't think anyone in the Premier League fears anyone else, but who do you say they'd be wary of?
From the Newcastle team?
Yes. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I think all of the forward players are players that can inflict damage. I think Asula is obviously slightly different to Voldemort in the sense that he can run in behind and stretch the opposition. He's done that very well when he's come off the bench at times. I've actually been surprised that Asula, it's taken him this long to get up to force his way into Eddie Howe's immediate plans, because I actually covered an FA Cup game around about 18 months ago or slightly longer when he was at Sheffield United against Gillingham. And although they were League Two opposition, I came away that day thinking this guy's got real potential. He was a cut above the rest. And I think stylistically, he does really suit the way Newcastle play. Of course, Voldemort is first choice, and he's been outstanding. I think the wide players, as I mentioned, are players that you wouldn't really fancy going up against. I know Alanga has struggled so far, which I am quite surprised about. But when he turns on the afterburners, I don't think there's any defender in world football that really fancies chasing him around when he's at the top of his game. I think Jacob Murphy's another player that's completely underrated. I think he's been incredible in terms of what he's done consistently over the past sort of 2 years or so. And of course, the left-hand side, as I mentioned. But I think one thing that stands out to me ahead of this game is that Spurs are probably likely to make a few changes in midfield. As I said, young Archie Gray has had a difficult time since he's joined the club from Leeds. Spurs actually pipped Brentford to his signing because they felt he had huge potential, and that remains the case, but he just hasn't had the minutes so far. And I think if Newcastle were to sort of unleash Bruno, maybe Joel Linton, which you might say to me is maybe unlikely, I think that would be quite a big task for Gray to try and nullify those in the middle of the park. Of course, he will have help. Trying to think who would probably feature. I think there is maybe a likelihood that Lucas Bergval's in there, but again, another young player. And I think, we've seen time and time again Newcastle's midfield run all over opposition. particularly at St James's. So I find that element interesting. In terms of just quickly on Spurs' forward line, I probably think Johnson will start again on the right, and then it will be Tell or Odegaard on the left. And all of those players have shown glimpses of promise, but they've never really done it consistently. Although Johnson did actually score 18 goals last season, he was the top goal scorer, so he probably has done it consistently. But I think Spurs fans are slightly frustrated with the fact that although he scores in matches, he actually, he's not a constant threat throughout the game. The consistency in his play just hasn't been there. So I think that will be an interesting assignment for whoever plays at fullback for Newcastle tomorrow night, because there's a little bit of pace there.
Do you think that's maybe where Spurs could exploit Newcastle? Because I think looking at what's available, obviously we know Lewis Hall isn't available, Tino Livramento isn't, so it will probably be Dan Burn at left back, I would imagine, with either Kieran Trippier or Emil Kraft at right back. So, it's not Newcastle's strongest full-back pairing, but do you feel the wide positions maybe are where Spurs could hit Newcastle?
Definitely. I think we've seen flashes of that in recent weeks. Wilton Odegaard is a player that Thomas Frank rates incredibly highly. And I know, some of the Newcastle fans might not even be too well aware of who Odegaard is. And that's probably telling, because he hasn't really had as many goals or even been involved as much as he probably would have liked. But he's a France under-21 international who was signed from Burnley, and he's got real pace and exceptional dribbling. But again, there are points in the match where sometimes he goes missing. So he's just looking to build that consistency. He actually started against Villa and Monaco. He went off in Monaco with a little bit of an abdomen issue. So I think he will probably get the nod, and ultimately he has got pace and he likes to come inside. On the other side, I mean, Brennan Johnson's an experienced Premier League player, but despite the fact Dan Burn is very tall and probably isn't blessed with pace, I don't think anyone really has a field day against him, which is a testament to, his ability. So it is a place they can hurt them. And definitely when we talk about the corners that, Spurs have been such a threat, those wide players are going to be key to relieving a bit of pressure, getting Spurs up the pitch tomorrow night and maybe winning a few set pieces.
Just in terms of the Carabao Cup in general, I mean, Newcastle, as I say, know all about it from last season. They've got a pretty decent recent record, getting to 2 finals and semi-finals. But in terms of Spurs, and I think because, and it's just my opinion, because it's Frank's first season, kind of any silverware would be a positive, no matter whether it's, I think we can both sit here and say the Carabao Cup maybe isn't at the top of the list of priorities, but it does feel an important competition for both clubs this year.
Absolutely. I'd 100% agree with you. I think for any new manager coming into a big club, silverware buys you time. I think we actually saw Mikel Arteta win the FA Cup in his first season at Arsenal, but people forget he's actually won that trophy. I think the fact it was during COVID is obviously maybe why it isn't remembered as much as other teams that have won the FA Cup. But it is important, and just because Spurs have won the Europa League last season, it doesn't mean automatically they're now entitled to a 10-year drought. I think the club are hungry, they're ambitious. As we talked about, they've got a fantastic stadium. They've got a huge infrastructure with ambitious directors and owners. So Spurs need to attack this competition. The problem for Frank, as we mentioned, is just the rotation. I think Spurs could have 9 players out tomorrow night with long-term absentees, and Udogie, Solanke and Romero, who are on the comeback trail, but this game just comes too soon for them. So I think the Champions League is, of course, a priority with the Premier League getting through. There's still a chance Spurs could make the top 8 because they've got quite a few favourable fixtures. I think they play Copenhagen and I think it's Slavia Prague or Karabakh at home. So unfortunately, the Carabao Cup probably isn't top of their priorities. But if they can get through tomorrow night, then they'll fancy their chances of maybe going the distance. And I think Newcastle were the perfect example of why the competition should be respected and what it can mean to supporters. I know, obviously, Newcastle had gone a long time without winning a trophy, but I think the approach from Howe throughout the competition was commendable, because they had to navigate a number of hurdles along the way to glory.
I found it quite sad that both clubs kind of saw their successes last year kind of downgraded by opposition supporters and even some writers as well. I mean, Spurs winning the Europa League was huge. You could sense what it meant to everyone involved at the club, and the same with the Carabao Cup with Newcastle. I mean, it had been, 1969 was Newcastle's last major silverware, and 1955 the last domestic silverware. So, have you sensed a bit of a change in maybe mentality from Spurs this year because they have had that long wait ended by the Europa League win?
It's difficult to gauge, to be honest, because the new manager has come in. I think ultimately that's why maybe it doesn't feel quite like, I don't know, it feels a distant memory, so to speak. I mean, I'm not sure if that's the case with Newcastle. I doubt that's the case.
There are still
there's
still people out celebrating, I think, now, to be fair.
Yeah.
So,
no,
I think home. Look, I'll be honest, it does feel a long time ago, but only because there's so much happened at Newcastle. Obviously, the Isak stuff over the summer, and other people leaving the club and new signings coming in. So it kind of feels like it is there, and I can sense a little bit of a change in emphasis from Newcastle, where maybe there is that belief they can go and win big games on a consistent basis now. But I think it is difficult with Spurs, as you say, because there's been so much change on and off the pitch, hasn't there?
Exactly, and I think that's ultimately why it probably does feel like a distant memory for Spurs, because it's a new manager, and effectively some of the stars of this team this season, such as JEKYLL, weren't here last season. Of course, they're reaping the rewards of the club's success with Champions League football. But I mean, Frank does like to mention that Spurs were so poor domestically whenever there's kind of a poor result. And, in the Champions League, he said, after the draw of Monaco, he said, I think people forget, we're the Europa League winners. So we're still kind of making the step up, which I think is a little bit of a get out jail card, at times. But it does feel such a long time ago now, and ultimately a lot of the Spurs players that were key to the Europa League run are not in the side right now. Brennan Johnson being one, although he started at Everton, and then you've got players like Yves Bissouma, who potentially looks like he might have already played his last game for the club because he's just undergone ankle surgery and he hasn't had a look in under Frank. He was actually dropped for the Super Cup defeat to PSG because of persistent lateness. Jed Spencer's has come in this season and sort of taken his game to the next level, although he kind of filled in at times last year. Udogie was the first choice left back. So it is a kind of new look team. Solanke as well is a big miss. He's not played much at all this season because of his ankle issues. So I think it is a slightly different Spurs, to be honest. But at the same time, it's one that's filling fans with excitement because it's clear there's potential. And the fact they've been so poor at home this season actually makes fans realise that actually, if we can improve the home form and keep, mirroring our success on the road, that they're onto a winner maybe. Sorry, it was a mouthful, that one.
It's I mean, it feels like it's going to be a big night under the lights at St James's. Big game for both clubs, and completely unpredictable, as I said earlier. But I will ask you for a prediction on the game.
Well, I think my prediction might change once we've seen the lineups, but I do think Newcastle will get through. I'm going to go for 2-1 Newcastle, and unfortunately, that's not me being negative from a Spurs perspective, but I think it's just difficult for any team, even a Manchester City, Liverpool, or Arsenal to go to Newcastle midweek in this competition, which isn't at the top of the priority list at the moment. What about you?
I'd probably go along with that, a 2-1. That sounds like my get out of jail card, doesn't it? If not doing a prediction, but no, I think as I say, a lot, as you said, a lot can change when the lineups come out. I think my concern would be the wide positions. I think Spurs' pace and wide positions can cause Newcastle issues. I'm still not really sure who's going to play in midfield. I've got a feeling there may be probably a rare chance for Bruno Guimaraes to drop out of the side, but that would bring Sandro Tonali in, who is every bit as integral in Newcastle's side. I think Jacob Ramsey may start along with possibly Lewis Miley in midfield, which would make it a really interesting battle in there between two kind of much changed midfield. So, but and I said on the podcast I recorded earlier that I worry about if Asula does start because he's not a prolific goal scorer. that Newcastle may struggle to score goals against a Spurs defence if Van de Ven plays. Obviously, that is pretty strong on the road. So it honestly feels really unpredictable. I sound as if I'm sitting firmly on the fence here. I think Newcastle will edge it just because they're at home and they are pretty strong at home. But yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting game, and one I think that will be decided by really fine margins.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think it's an exciting game. I think, sometimes we see the Carabao Cup kind of scrutinised, as we sort of touched upon, but these two sides are going to deliver an entertaining spectacle because of the unpredictability of it. I think both teams want to go far in this competition, but they actually need to provide some of their fringe players or squad players with some much needed minutes, and I think that adds to the spectacle. And as we mentioned, St James's under the lights is always entertaining. We always like watching those games, even if we're not Newcastle supporters. So I think it's going to be a cracker. Although I feel like if it's 0-0 now, then maybe I would have cursed it.
Yeah, I'm quite good at that myself. But no, that's been brilliant, Ryan. Thanks for your time for this episode of View from the Opposition. I'll be back on Monday for the Monday show, imaginatively titled Monday Show, looking back at Newcastle's game against West Ham at the weekend. But many thanks for joining us. Like and subscribe everywhere you can. And a final thank you to our sponsors, that is NordVPN. Click the link in the podcast description box to keep yourself protected whilst online. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day back guarantee, money back guarantee, I should say. And with our discount plans start from just £2.30. So thanks for tuning in. Once again, we will see you next time.